While watching The Monkey, which is brought to us by Oz Perkins, the director of Long Legs, I kept having this intrusive thought come across my mind, which is this movie good slash interesting, or is it just like extremely dumb? And to be honest, I kind of think that's the point of this movie in lot of ways, and what the director Oz Perkins achieves with The Monkey is this balance. It's both about something and adapting a short story made by a guy snorting cocaine in the 1980s. Like, it has layers to it. It is able to achieve both. It's this insane, absurd story that really isn't held together that well. And it's also just an avenue for this director in Oz Perkins, who just has a really messed up sensibility to create something like visually engaging and crazy. And that's what I want to talk about today in my review of The Monkey. But what is The Monkey? And I think if you've seen the trailers for this movie, you might be confused what exactly this movie is. As I understood this movie follows two twin brothers who find a toy monkey that they wind up, and when the monkey plays his little drums, it leads to a horrendous death that can only be described in one way and one way only, as a 1 in a million accident. That's essentially what happens. The monkey beats his drum. He doesn't kill you, he doesn't stab you, nothing like that. It's just if someone is in that proximity, the craziest, gnarliest death happens to them that can only be described as a 1 in a million accident. That's what makes this movie upsetting, violent, over the top. It's the deaths in this movie are insane. It's not just murder, it's obscene what we're watching. Like, we're watching something truly disgusting unfold. So the monkey beats its drums, and then somebody accidentally trips and a knife goes like straight through their eyes. Like something like that. Like, that's the level. And that's kind of a tame version of what this movie is. The death in this movie is really the highlight, and we'll get to that in a second. But as the story keeps going, these two brothers, they grow apart and they're forced to reunite as adults once they discover the reemergence of these toy monkeys that they thought that they destroyed in their youth. Theo James is the main actor in this movie. He plays both twin brothers, Hal and Bill. They're polar opposite characters. Hal and Bill have never had this great relationship. In fact, like, one of the brothers is like a little psychotic, like he's very crazy, and the other brother is living from the trauma of this monkey from his childhood. What this movie is actually about is, I think, a really good question to explore. As I identified this movie on what it is trying to achieve, it is a movie that taps into the fear of the randomness of death. It is a movie that is able to locate something so absurd about the silliness of death, where it's just like the weirdness of when you hear about something on the news, where it's just like, this person died from this. Like, think of the Florida man dies this way, where it's just like, oh, yep, well, like, what? Like, that is what this movie is essentially dealing with. It's the principle of that. Like, you hear something that you can't almost believe, and thus you have to give it a superstitious element in it. I think that's where the horror is leading us in The Monkey. And that's what this movie is commentating on. And with that said, this is a short story by Stephen King, and this movie has a lot of insanity to it. Some of this movie I really vibed with. Some of this movie I also found just incredibly. There is a Stephen King element I should just talk about, I guess. Stephen King is not always my cup of tea. I think he can really give us great stories, and then there's other parts where his sensibilities I struggle with. And that's where I felt watching this movie, where there's just stuff in this movie, and I'm like, I'm not really clicking in to the wavelength of this movie, but there is a lot to really enjoy. Let's just talk about, I think, the main thing of what I enjoyed of this movie, which is this Oz Perkins being able to take what I like about Stephen King novel and dissecting that. And I think Oz Perkins is this really talented director. Time and time again, he's shown that he has an understanding of atmosphere, of just disgusting, disturbing imagery being placed on screen. That's when The Monkey is at its best. When this movie is just psychotic and sadistic, I think this movie has a lot of fun in that. And it's not a movie that, again, is sadistic for sadistic's sake. This is a movie trying to tap into the fear of death. And that's where this movie really clicks. Like, whenever the monkey is on screen, I find this movie captivating. Everything revolves around it, the absurdity of which the monkey causes, like all of that, like when death happens, like the scenes, like he does this really good. It's Chekhov's gun like 100 times in this movie, where there's something that's on the screen and you're like, well, one of the characters is going to die because this thing is there. How will this eventually connect to the monkey banging its drums and then this person dying? Like, it's all in this movie, and it's a really good setup. Most of the kills in this movie are extremely fun to watch on screen. Like, there is a lot of just like, oh my god, like really, like that just happened. Like, that is a lot of the fun of this movie. What I don't like, and let's talk about this now before we get into that. If you're liking this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Getting back to what I don't like about this movie is I just don't think this is a particularly well put together movie. I found this movie to just really go in waves. It's about 95 minutes, I think, if I'm correct. Maybe it's a little bit shorter. But this is a movie that I noticed while watching it. I was like, okay, where are we going here? And that's really because anytime the monkey isn't at the front and center of the screen, I found myself dazing off with the characterizations of these people in this movie. Hal and Bill, played by Theo James. Good performance from Theo James. Not going to complain about the performance. I will just say there's not much characterization between them. I didn't find anyone to be particularly well fleshed out. There's a few really fun celebrities in this movie, or actors, I should say, in this movie. One of them is introduced in the beginning sequence of this movie, which is honestly one of the best moments of this movie, is when this actor appears. There's another fun supporting performance halfway through the movie that I also really enjoyed. But besides that, like, Tatiana Maslany, I think is how you pronounce her name. She's the actress from She-Hulk. I might have butchered that name. I do apologize. But she's the actress from She-Hulk. She plays a mom in this character. She plays the mom, I should say, of Hal and Bill. She's good, but she's not in the movie a ton. Like, there's a lot of these performances in the movie that are just like, they're really not fleshed out, and I could have really used more. The difference is, I think this movie is hitting a tone that is very similar to It, specifically part one. And there's a lot of these childhood interactions and like the absurdity of the bullying in this movie, for instance. Like these brothers have a group full of bullies that bully them. And like there is just an hugeness to the meanness of these bullies. And like that's something that I found very reminiscent to what's It does very well. And there's moments like that are really effective. Like the childhood stuff, I noticed it like going a little long, but that is probably the best part of the movie, is the first half, really, when these kids are young. When the movie, and it's actually very similar to It Part 2, when it follows the adults, I notice my enjoyment slash locked in feeling watching the movie. That's where it kind of evaporates. That's where I started noticing myself like, I don't really care about any of the performance. I don't care about these characters as they grow older. I don't think there's enough of a story to keep it grounded in a way that I enjoyed. And that's where I was just like, okay, whenever the monkey's off screen, there's just like a level of lack of engagement that I had. Again, not to say that the second half of this movie is bad. I think there's a lot of really redeeming stuff in the second movie. There is a pool sequence in this movie that, oh my god, that is one of the gnarliest kills I've seen in a movie in a hot second. Like, there is a bunch of that in this movie. There's one with a real estate agent that is really fun. There's, like, a lot to really enjoy about this movie. I just don't think that it is, as a whole, this incredible script. I really do think this is a story that just starts falling short. And it is really my enjoyment for this movie was what I like about Oz Perkins as a director, what I've seen from him, the sadisticness that he brings to his movies, the creepiness, the atmosphere, like the comedic sensibility, I think is really at play. That's the element that I think makes the sadistic elements work really well, is there is just a clear sense of dark comedy that Oz Perkins is channeling within the monkey, and the craziness, absurdity of the death. Like, that works really well. So the Oz Perkins sensibilities of it, I like. The issues that I can have with Stephen King as a writer, and specifically with something like this, where it's not even a fleshed out novel, this is a short story that he wrote back in 1980, I believe is the year. Like, that's where I'm like, the story beats of this movie I found very lackluster, and in some ways very repetitive of the stuff that we've seen from Stephen King. Like, you know a lot of the beats, you know a lot of the writing, like, lot of it can feel very similar to other Stephen King works that we've seen. With that all said, like, not a disregard, and for people who are like locked in on Stephen King, like, I have a feeling they'll really like this movie. As someone who can find themselves a bit hit or miss with Stephen King, the story beats at times were a bit much for me, or I didn't really care for. But overall, definitely a recommendation. 90 minutes like this is a very fun film. And I think there is a lot of fun to be had. Even as the second half of the movie isn't as great, there is still a lot of really great sequences in that second half. And there's a lot to be really enjoyed. Overall recommendation for me, I'm going 3 out of 5 stars for The Monkey, and I can recommend this to you. So thank you so much for watching this review. I should be back Sunday talking about the Oscars, and I'll be on a lot next week. So make sure to subscribe to my channel for more. Thank you so much for watching.